Hello and welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we analyze the breaking news.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The global news cycle has been just completely and utterly dominated by one single event.
One event.
The U.S. military operation in Venezuela, the abduction of President Nicholas Maduro. I mean, this wasn't some slow-burn diplomatic crisis. This was rapid, spectacular, and the shockwaves, they are still settling.
They really are. And this is a true inflection point. All the sources we've gathered for this deep dive, they're treating it exactly as that. This can't be seen as just, an isolated incident.
Right.
No, analysts all over the world are framing this as a definitive moment of profound global destabilization.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating here is that the global reaction suggests this was never just about Venezuela.
Right.
It's about exposing a kind of lawlessness on the world stage, a willingness to completely ignore decades of international norms.
Absolutely. And when we talk about global consequences, we're not just talking about a few angry press releases or diplomatic condemnations. This action sets some incredibly dangerous precedents.
Both legal and military precedents for future confrontations. And with countries far outside the Western Hemisphere, we're talking about, escalating tensions with peer rivals like Iran and Cuba.
Of course.
And maybe most surprisingly, it could even set the stage for a dramatic rupture with a close NATO ally, Denmark, over Greenland, of all things.
Precisely. So our mission today is pretty robust. We need to sift through the facts around the Venezuela operation. We have to examine the tactical execution in almost microscopic detail, because the success, it hangs entirely on this crucial element of betrayal.
Right, the inside job.
Exactly. Then we have to dissect the alleged core motivations, which frankly seem to change from one moment to the next.
You really do.
From vague claims about, crime and fentanyl to these really explicit statements about oil and geopolitical control. And finally, and this is maybe the most important part, we need to figure out what this strategic chaos means for the future of international law and global stability. Our sources are crystal clear on this. From a very narrow military perspective, this was an undeniable tactical success, no question.
Mm-hmm.
But the overwhelming analysis suggests it is shaping up to be a catastrophic strategic disaster.
Correct.
So we're here to give you, the learner, the thorough context needed to understand why the execution of a 90-minute raid may have fundamentally destabilized the next 90 years of global order.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's start with the action itself, the raid.
Mm-hmm.
When the dust settled, the military declared an amazing success. And internal reports, they described it as a brazen, illegal, dangerous operation that was just executed with incredible precision. The whole thing, from the moment they went in to the moment they extracted, was clocked in at around 90 minutes.
And that speed, that precision, that's exactly what made it so stunning. But it's also what makes it so misleading.
How so?
Well, we are talking about a massive deployment of resources, all aimed at seizing one single individual. The reports detail the use of something like 150 aircraft and ships. That includes specialized transport, intelligence platforms, high-speed attack helicopters, and of course, highly trained Delta Force operators.
So, from a purely technical standpoint,
from the very narrow perspective of executing a specialized, high-stakes, snatch-and-grab mission, the execution was flawless.
And the U.S. military establishment has been quick to boast about that, right? Using it to send signals to other rivals.
Oh, absolutely. We heard high-level officials mocking Russia, specifically pointing out that their advanced air defense systems, which Venezuela had purchased, completely failed.
I remember that quote. Someone asked pointedly whether those air defenses didn't quite work so well, did they, downtown Caracas?
That's the one. But that very boast, that mockery, it actually reveals the deeper analysis that other countries are performing right now.
What do you mean?
It's the resources. The massive commitment required to capture a single head of state that is not reflective of a general warfighting capability in a large-scale sustained conflict. A quick surgical raid is one thing. Sustaining a war of attrition against a pure rival is entirely another. And rivals like China and Russia, they're studying this operation not for its success, but for the inherent industrial and logistical limitations it exposes.
So it shows weakness in a way.
It shows the limits.
Yeah.
But the most critical element of this operation, the thing that allowed it to clock in at 90 minutes instead of becoming a multi-day disaster, is the overwhelming evidence pointing toward an inside job.
Okay, let's really unpack that betrayal element. The sources are strong on this, suggesting the success of the extraction relied almost entirely on collaboration from inside the Venezuelan security apparatus.
Yes.
What specific evidence do we have that this was an inside job and not just, overwhelming U.S. technical superiority?
The evidence is compelling. It comes from multiple intelligence reports that have been shared across allied nations, the operations planning. It was basically predicated on the cooperation of at least one significant, highly placed source.
Or a network of sources.
Or, more likely, a small network of sources, right? Within the highest levels of the Venezuelan military intelligence and law enforcement services. Without that internal guarantee, the risk to U.S. forces would have been astronomical.
So why was that cooperation so critical? What did it actually do?
It's all about logistics and tactics. I mean, think about it. The U.S. forces were targeting a highly protected individual in the heart of a fortified capital city.
Right, a city bristling with sophisticated, modern anti-aircraft systems.
Exactly. Specifically, Venezuela has the S-300 VM batteries. These are advanced, long-range Russian surface-to-air missile systems.
And they're not just for high-flying jets.
No, not at all. They're designed to shoot down high-flying aircraft and ballistic missiles, sure, but they're also perfectly capable of engaging low-flying helicopters and cruise missiles.
Which would have been the primary threat to an extraction team.
Precisely. If those S-300 systems or even smaller mobile systems had been operational and tasked with air defense, the U.S. forces, especially the helicopters used for the extraction, would have faced catastrophic casualties.
So the informant's job was simply to neutralize that threat.
That was the core of it. This individual or group was reportedly recruited by a U.S. three-letter agency, likely the CIA or DIA for all the classic motivations.
May a way out.
Immense monetary reward, the promise of secure relocation, maybe a U.S. visa or a green card for their family, the usual playbook. And their core function was to ensure a complete and total stand-down.
Meaning
Convincing key personnel to literally turn off the weapon systems, to disable communication links, and to just look the other way.
And that perfectly explains the utter surprise experienced by the target. Maduro and his personal security detail, which was reportedly made up of 32 Cuban bodyguards, they were completely unprepared.
Totally caught by surprise. The sources indicate that all 32 of those Cuban guards were killed during the short, fierce engagement.
Along with dozens of Venezuelan security personnel.
Yes. The failure of those air defenses to engage U.S. forces, especially during those crucial moments when helicopters were just hovering over the extraction site, that tells the whole story.
If the military had been unified.
If the Venezuelan military had been unified and engaged, those assets would have been deployed. The extraction was successful because the defense had been functionally disabled before the first U.S. helicopter even crossed the border.
It sounds almost like a manufactured scenario. You mentioned earlier that this mirrors some historical intelligence operations.
It does. One source, a former intelligence officer, made a really interesting point. He noted that the CIA was historically notorious for fixing scenes during certain exercises or black ops planning.
What does that mean, fixing scenes?
They would remove known obstacles, neutralize local threats, or confirm that key personnel were absent, all to ensure a perfect intelligence collection or a flawless execution. This operation, allegedly, was staged in a similar, profoundly successful way. It was arranged internally, which removed the need for U.S. forces to face any significant ground fire or anti-aircraft engagement. The entire mission, at its core, relied on betrayal guaranteeing a clear path.
So, tactically stunning, but primarily because of that internal compromise. But now we have to turn to the strategic failure.
Yeah.
Because the primary goal of any such decapitation strike is always regime change. And that seems to have completely failed.
It has. Despite the high casualties, sources indicate upwards of 80 people were killed, including civilians caught in the crossfire and military personnel. The strategic goal was missed.
That is the ultimate strategic chaos, isn't it? The tactical success that leads to strategic failure. Maduro is physically removed. He's currently in New York facing trial. But the system he represented,
The Chavez-Maduro political structures, the state institutions, they remain intact, unified, and fully functioning.
and the succession plan worked immediately.
It did. The constitutional order, which was designed for precisely this kind of scenario, it just kicked right in. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was immediately sworn in as the acting president.
And reports from Caracas.
Reports from Caracas, even from sources critical of the regime, indicate there is no vacuum or there's no lack of authority. The state institutions, the ministries, the military high command, the state-run oil company are all functioning exactly as they did the day before the raid.
So they decapitated the leadership, but the body politic remains strong.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Now, we did see some immediate counter-narratives surface, especially in Western media. Suggestions that Rodriguez herself might have been part of some soft transition plan.
Implying she was a compliant figure ready to make a pact with the U.S. administration.
Exactly. How did the sources analyze that possibility?
Those reports were strongly and very widely dismissed by experts, particularly those with deep knowledge of the Venezuelan political machine.
Right.
They classified this whisper campaign as a classic sophisticated psychological operations campaign, a psyop.
Designed to do what the military raid couldn't.
Precisely. To achieve what the military operation failed to sow division and distrust among the Venezuelan revolutionary forces. The goal was to break the political unity of the leadership, making a subsequent regime collapse much easier.
But Rodriguez's own actions directly undermined that narrative, didn't they?
They absolutely did. I mean, her swearing-in ceremony was a masterclass in defiance and geopolitical signaling. The most crucial element, which was broadcast all across Venezuela, was the visual confirmation of her hugging the Chinese and Russian ambassadors right after taking the oath.
So what was the specific message in that image? It's a very powerful visual.
It was highly deliberate and multi-layered. First, it emphasized the continued, unwavering commitment to Venezuela's international alliances. It was asserting their sovereignty against U.S. will.
Okay.
Second, and this is crucial for the domestic base, the Chavista movement that still holds a lot of power on the street, it sent a clear signal that the resistance continues, that the new leadership is not going to fold under pressure from the United States or from the Western financial interests that are now circling.
So the message is, we're still here, and our allies are still with us.
The message is, we stand against Wall Street, we stand with our allies, and the revolution lives on. This rapid consolidation of power by Rodriguez just underscores why a tactical hit and run failed to achieve the necessary strategic objective of collapsing the entire regime structure. The sources really suggest the U.S. severely underestimated the depth of institutional loyalty within Caracas.
Which brings us to the next big question. The moment the operation was confirmed, the world immediately asked, why?
Yes, why?
Why risk this level of global destabilization, this blatant breach of international law, for a tactical success that failed to achieve the ultimate goal of regime change? The U.S. justifications have been, well, a moving target.
To put it mildly.
It started with crime, right? The cartel of the Suns and this supposed threat of fentanyl.
And those initial justifications, they just immediately crumbled under any real scrutiny. The entire premise, built on law enforcement rather than foreign policy grounds, was weak from the start.
Let's start with the fentanyl claim.
Okay, the fentanyl claim. Critics immediately noted the absurdity of using fentanyl as the primary justification, especially when you look at the actual drug charges that were filed against Maduro.
Which were for what exactly?
The actual charges filed by the U.S. Justice Department mentioned cocaine trafficking, not fentanyl.
Oh.
And moreover, analysts quickly pointed out that Venezuela is demonstrably not the major source of cocaine or, crucially, fentanyl that enters the United States. That supply chain overwhelmingly runs through the traditional routes.
So Colombia and Mexico.
Primarily Colombia and Mexico. So to seize a head of state based on a drug that isn't primarily sourced from his country and a drug that isn't even in the indictment, it struck critics as a profound stretch of legal justification.
Okay, so that brings us to the Cartel of the Suns, which sounds like a major international crime syndicate, but seems to be something far more amorphous, according to the sources.
It's a great name, isn't it? But yes, the term Cartel of the Suns refers less to a cohesive, centralized criminal syndicate like, say, the Medellin cartel, and more to a loose network of potentially corrupt officials within the Venezuelan military and government who may be involved in illicit activities, including drug transit. But here's the historical irony that critics immediately seized on.
What's that?
One well-sourced analysis noted that the Cartel of the Suns network itself was allegedly a creation of the U.S. intelligence community back in the 1980s during the Reagan administration.
Wait, hold on. So the network they are now indicting Maduro for being a part of was allegedly a CIA creation. Can you walk us through the sourcing on that claim?
Yeah.
Because that's a huge deal.
It is a major Complicated and very politically charged claim, yes, but it needs to be understood in the context of the Iran-Contra era. According to numerous investigative reports from that period, the CIA was involved in facilitating the movement of drugs, specifically cocaine, to raise money for illegal black operations in Central America.
Bypassing congressional oversight.
Bypassing congressional oversight, most notably to support the anti-communist Contra forces in Nicaragua. Sources argue that the precursors to the Cartel of the Suns, these networks of Venezuelan military personnel who were turning a blind eye to or actively participating in drug transit, were either inadvertently created or directly utilized by U.S. intelligence to move material and cash during those black ops campaigns.
So this historical sourcing, it paints the current indictment as deeply hypocritical.
That's the argument, that they're prosecuting a network that, by some accounts, only exists because of historical U.S. covert activity in the region.
So the crime rationale fentanyl and the cartel seems weak and, well, historically ironic. But then the president explicitly shifted the goalposts to something far more blatant and tangible.
The shift was almost unavoidable because the U.S. president just openly stated the true motivation in a series of highly unconventional press conferences.
Yeah, I remember this.
He repeatedly and explicitly framed the whole operation around resources, specifically oil. He talked constantly about the intention to take a lot of money out of Venezuela and then use that money to rebuild their infrastructure.
Infrastructure, he noted, which was largely installed by U.S. companies 25 years ago and is now rotted.
Exactly. This wasn't cloaked in humanitarian language or, protecting democracy. It was blatant resource capture and debt collection.
And Wall Street picked up that signal immediately.
Immediately. The financial motivation became crystal clear. Reports from major financial desks confirm that in the days following Maduro's capture, major institutional investors were already planning a reconnaissance trip to Caracas.
So we're talking hedge funds, asset managers.
Representatives from major hedge funds, global asset managers, energy executives, and defense sector insiders. They were literally packing their bags, preparing to loot Venezuela's resources the moment the dust settled.
Which really shows the deep institutional overlap between military action and financial opportunity.
It does. Wall Street analysts showed immediate and explicit optimism. They seemed willing to accept that military aggression itself has become just another opportunity to cash in.
And this brings us directly to the Citgo controversy, which connects this financial grab to specific, very high-profile individuals.
Right, the Citgo controversy is maybe the most concrete proof of the underlying financial motivation and the deep integration of financial power with state power.
So remind us, what is Citgo?
Citgo is, or was, Venezuela's most profitable foreign asset. It's a major U.S. oil refiner. And for 2 years before the operation, it had been the subject of a highly contentious auction process in U.S. courts. It was being treated as a judgment debtor to maximize recovery for various creditors holding claims against Venezuela.
And this legal maneuvering paved the way for a specific financial player to gain control.
It did. Enter Paul Singer. He's a very prominent hedge fund manager, a notorious vulture capitalist, a MAGA billionaire, and a massive political donor.
And connected.
Very connected. Singer is a significant supporter of the Zionist agenda and has close financial and political ties to powerful figures like Senator Marco Rubio and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. His firm, Elliott Management, acquired control of Citgo at a heavily discounted price of $5.3 billion.
So if the asset was worth more, why was such a discounted price accepted? That's the question.
That is the core of the controversy. Sources indicate that rival offers for Citgo were upwards of $7 billion, maybe even higher. Yet Singer's firm ended up winning the bid just 1 month before the Maduro capture.
The timing is suspect, to say the least.
Venezuela formally argued in U.S. courts that this process was fundamentally illegal, that it was stripping a sovereign nation of its strategic asset in favor of a lower bidder with powerful political connections. This timing, the legal seizure immediately followed by the physical seizure of the Venezuelan leader, it struck many as highly orchestrated.
The outrage in Caracas, as we said, was immense. Delcy Rodriguez, when she was sworn in, she publicly linked the military assault to this specific financial maneuvering.
She did. She stated that the assault had undeniably Zionist overtones, connecting the action directly to the financial interests of figures like Singer and his political backers.
And this moves the analysis far beyond just criticizing the policies of an individual U.S. president. The sources argue this operation is indicative of something deeper.
a deeper, far more pervasive problem, what they call a hyper-imperialist structure that dominates U.S. foreign policy regardless of who is in the White House.
A structure designed to achieve what on a global scale?
Its primary function is economic. It's to defend and maintain the U.S. as the undisputed center of the world economy.
And it does that how?
It achieves this by creating conditions that intimidate other countries into handing over their surplus wealth, their resources, their future economic potential to the U.S. financial system. And this intimidation now manifests not just through sanctions, but through blatant military force and the abduction of heads of state.
And this system is crucial because
It's crucial because as the U.S. loses ground to peer rivals like China in terms of industrial and trade capacity, military and financial muscle become the last tools to ensure American capital remains dominant and profitable.
and that desperation, driven by this hyper-imperialist structure, is what led to the most severe long-term consequence of the Venezuela operation.
The dramatic assault on the foundations of international law itself.
Yeah.
This is the global shift that is being scrutinized by every foreign ministry worldwide right now. The operation explicitly signals a complete move away from an international law-based order and fully into what its proponents call a rules-based order.
Can you just clarify that distinction for our listener?
Yeah.
What is the practical difference between an international law-based order and a rules-based order?
It's a great question. Think of it this way. International law is based on treaties, conventions, and established international institutions, like the UN Charter, that everyone, regardless of their size, theoretically signs up for. It's supposed to be universal. A rules-based order, however, is what the powerful unilaterally define. It's one country saying, we are the referee and we decide the rules as we go along, and those rules apply to everyone except us.
So it's the law of the jungle.
It's the law of the jungle. And this operation, by abducting a sitting head of state and trying him in a U.S. domestic court, is the ultimate manifestation of the law becoming simply what the powerful say it is.
And the legal framework for actually prosecuting Maduro in the U.S. seems extremely tenuous. He's being run through New York courts on charges that legal scholars are calling, well, unprecedented and almost farcical. Things like conspiracy to possess machine guns while he was the head of a sovereign nation.
The jurisdiction is, as legal experts widely agree, very shaky. The core issue is this assertion of U.S. jurisdiction over acts committed by a foreign head of state on foreign soil. Legal experts are questioning the DEA and the FBI's right to conduct complex military-style captures on foreign soil without permission from that sovereign government, especially since the U.S. didn't even recognize the sitting government, yet based the indictment on claims of a domestic criminal conspiracy. It's a legal pretzel.
And the charges themselves are thin.
They're thin. Sources confirm that the charges related to the Cartel of the Suns have been notably downgraded in recent indictments, likely due to that historical baggage we just discussed.
But the U.S. Justice Department has decided to proceed regardless, which seems to carry an extreme risk of self-sabotage.
That risk is massive. I mean, if Maduro's defense team is allowed to pursue standard legal processes, they could demand comprehensive discovery. Which means exposing classified sources, revealing the names of informants, perhaps even the inside job collaborators, and potentially detailing the full extent of U.S. black operations and intelligence gathering within Venezuela.
So it would profoundly embarrass the CIA.
It would embarrass the CIA, threaten the lives of informants, and reveal intelligence methods. The department is taking an unprecedented gamble that they can convict Maduro without opening up the intelligence floodgates.
The ramifications of this go so far beyond one courtroom. This is about setting a global legal precedent that is, well, truly terrifying, especially for nations that are not currently global hegemons.
Absolutely. By asserting this unilateral right to abduct a head of state and transport them for trial in a domestic court, essentially treating a foreign president as a common criminal, the United States effectively grants any and every other country the reciprocal right to do the exact same thing.
Right.
Imagine Russia or China or any emerging power deciding to abduct a U.S. ally's leader or even a high-ranking U.S. official and subjecting them to a trial in Moscow or Beijing. As the current global hegemon begins to face decline, this legal path is monumentally self-destructive. It prioritizes short-term vengeance over long-term strategic security. It's the ultimate example of a present tactical success undermining the future.
So that tactical decision to abduct Maduro, it wasn't just framed as an isolated action. It was actually marketed by its proponents as enforcing a massive new foreign policy concept.
The Donroe Doctrine.
The Donroe Doctrine. What is that?
It's essentially a highly aggressive, militarized reinterpretation of the 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine.
Okay.
Its core tenet is this aggressive demand that the Western Hemisphere not be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
And which rivals are they specifically targeting with this doctrine?
The doctrine specifically names China, Russia, and Iran. The message is simple and blunt. Any significant economic, political, or military influence exerted by these three powers in Latin America or the Caribbean is unacceptable, and the U.S. reserves the right to remove it violently if necessary. This framing justifies the action not as illegal kidnapping, but as a necessary defense of the hemisphere.
But the global community, especially those targeted rivals, immediately pointed out the hypocrisy of it all. While the U.S. dictates who its neighbors in Latin America can trade with, insisting that China and Russia must get the hell out of our hemisphere, the U.S. simultaneously asserts the absolute right to deploy its own military assets and strategic alliances, like NATO, or the new UKES agreement right up to the borders of Russia and China.
Without any constraint whatsoever.
Right.
And this double standard is the central piece of data that Russia and China are currently analyzing. They view the Donroe Doctrine as a final, desperate attempt by the U.S. to unilaterally manage global power distribution. They are not looking at the Venezuelan operation through the celebratory lens of U.S. media.
No, they're looking at it through what did the source say? A cold, dispassionate spreadsheet.
Exactly, a spreadsheet.
So if they were looking at a spreadsheet, what specific metrics are they prioritizing?
They are analyzing the long-term limitations of U.S. power. They're focused on industrial capacity, the U.S.'s ability to manufacture necessary weapons and equipment at scale, and the proven inability of the U.S. to sustain a long war of attrition without massive disruption to its economy and troop readiness. The massive resources deployed just to get one man out of Caracas. To them, that suggested overstretch, not infinite capacity.
So how are Russia and China responding to this perceived U.S. lawlessness? Are they escalating their own military engagement in Venezuela or Central America to challenge the doctrine directly?
No, that would play directly into the U.S. narrative of foreign infiltration. The sources suggest their strategic response is much more measured.
How so?
They view the U.S. as an irrational actor engaged in profoundly self-destructive actions like tearing up international law. They are not intervening militarily in the Western Hemisphere precisely because Venezuela is not a vital national interest that would justify a direct confrontation.
So instead, they are coordinating a containment strategy.
That's correct. Their strategy involves becoming even more cautious in their external engagements, while coordinating a long-term economic and geopolitical containment strategy against what one European analyst termed the Neo-Caligula, referring to the unpredictable imperial tendencies displayed by Washington.
They're content to let the U.S. create its own internal chaos.
Through overreach and the destruction of norms, yes.
And this tactical success in Caracas has, ironically, accelerated defensive measures globally, hasn't it? Especially among smaller or targeted nations.
This is the most profound security impact of the operation. The Venezuela event created a global consensus among non-aligned nations. The U.S. is no longer a reliable guarantor of sovereignty, and international law is meaningless when confronted by U.S. military power.
A dangerous consensus.
Very. As one source quoted Russian officials stating, the operation became the best proof of the fact that any state must strengthen its armed forces to the maximum. For many world leaders, the conclusion is bleak but simple. The only reliable protection against what they now see as unconstrained U.S. aggression is to maximize their own armed forces.
Which many analysts interpret as accelerating the pursuit of a nuclear arsenal, or at least highly effective strategic missile defenses.
Absolutely. This action directly promotes global instability and arms races. It fundamentally undermines long-term security.
So we've established the strategic chaos. But the sources are already identifying the next concrete targets the U.S. administration, and its advocates are openly threatening, starting with Cuba.
Cuba, a classic target under the newly declared Donroe Doctrine.
Yes, it's frequently cited as the most likely next step. Key figures within the administration, most notably Marco Rubio, are openly threatening military action against the island nation.
And this is despite Cuba posing no credible threat to the U.S. It's a nation struggling economically, barely able to feed its own people. It certainly does not possess a military capable of challenging the United States.
So this fixation seems purely driven by an imperialist mindset.
It's about demanding absolute obedience, regardless of any objective threat assessment. It's the ultimate expression of the "you must obey or else" mentality.
And it's about enforcing total conformity.
It is. The core issue is that Cuba has historically demonstrated that a nation can resist U.S. will for decades. One source pointed out that Cuba has managed to avoid exactly this kind of snatch-and-grab scenario, the decapitation of its leadership, for over 60 years.
Which is an extraordinary geopolitical accomplishment given its proximity.
It is. So attacking Cuba now would be about eliminating that symbolic resistance, proving that every single nation in the hemisphere must submit.
Okay, so moving beyond the Western Hemisphere, the Venezuela operation is explicitly being cited by antagonists of Iran as the last rehearsal before attacking Iran.
That language is coming directly from Israeli media and from U.S. officials who are closely associated with the security apparatus. The perceived success in Venezuela, that quick, clean extraction of a leader, is leading to immense overconfidence.
And given the political relationships,
Given the extremely close political relationship between the current U.S. administration and Prime Minister Netanyahu, analysts now believe there is a significantly high likelihood of war with Iran soon.
but the comparison between Venezuela and Iran is just fundamentally flawed, isn't it?
It's vastly flawed. Analysts warn that an attack on Iran would be vastly more dangerous than Venezuela. It would instantly raise the risk of great power clashes and escalation.
Because Iran's capabilities are just on another level.
Completely. While the U.S. military might feel emboldened, believing they can replicate the Venezuela success by destroying Iran's missile system or conducting a similar decapitation strike, Iran's defensive and offensive capabilities are far superior. Iran's military doctrine doesn't rely solely on air defense systems like Venezuela's. They rely on asymmetric responses and critically robust offensive missile capabilities that can reach U.S. bases and even Israeli territory.
So if they think because Venezuelan air defenses failed, Iranian defenses will also fail, they are missing the bigger picture of Iran's deterrent capability.
They are missing the entire picture. Iran's successful deterrence in previous confrontations was often based on its ability to launch retaliatory strikes that would cause unacceptable damage. Attacking Iran would be an infinitely more complex and risky situation than Caracas, yet the perception of a Venezuelan success is creating a pathway for reckless action. This perceived rehearsal could easily lead to an existential conflict.
And finally, we turn to the most surprising fallout from all of this, the threat against a close U.S. ally, Denmark, over Greenland. I mean, this just shows the sheer scope of the Donroe Doctrine's imperial ambition.
This is a classic example of imperial overreach fueled by success. The source is concerned that the U.S. administration has revised its plan, which was previously floated and then widely ridiculed, to take Greenland from Denmark.
And the justification is?
The justification remains the same, citing national security reasons related to Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic. This is another facet of the Donroe Doctrine, just applied to the Arctic frontier. And the sheer political performativity of it was highlighted when the Secretary of War's wife posted a specific map of Greenland with a U.S. flag superimposed over it on social media.
Adding fuel to the diplomatic fire.
Completely.
So how is the Danish government reacting to what sounds like a ridiculous threat against a close ally?
They are genuinely and profoundly concerned. They are looking at Venezuela and seeing a clear recent precedent. The lesson they extract is that the U.S. is no longer constrained by international law or even by alliance loyalty. They believe the U.S. is willing to simply take Greenland, if Denmark does not bend the knee, and submit completely to U.S. strategic interests in the region.
And what would be the global consequence of the U.S. forcing Denmark's hand or attempting to seize Greenland?
The potential geopolitical consequence is staggering. An irreparable rupture of NATO. If the U.S. acts aggressively against a founding NATO ally over territory, European countries would be forced to make an immediate, impossible choice: support an irrational, lawless U.S. actor, or form a new, inward-looking European security alliance designed to contain American aggression.
The sheer recklessness of it is astounding.
The sheer recklessness of using a tactical success in Caracas to justify such a threat against an ally like Denmark. It just utterly underscores the strategic chaos that this one operation has unleashed on the world stage.
That was a sobering and deeply thorough look at one rapid military operation has violently redefined the global geopolitical landscape for you. We really hope this deep dive gave you the clarity and the comprehensive context needed to understand why this breaking news story is so significant.
Remember, this deep dive really shows that tactical success often masks deeper strategic chaos and severe long-term risks. And these risks include imperial overstretch, financial instability, as you see Wall Street circling the carcass of a sovereign nation, and the possible dangerous acceleration of confrontations with major global powers, all driven by a self-destructive adherence to a rules-based order that only benefits the most powerful.
The most important question arising from these sources isn't simply who was behind the Caracas operation, but whether the Venezuela event will ultimately be recorded by history as a fleeting success used to justify further aggression, or the definitive moment the United States finally demonstrated that it has destroyed the framework of international law that once restrained its own power.
Subscribe to our channel for more breaking news and press the like button if you liked our news analysis.
And we'll say goodbye until we meet again.